Hello and happy Valentine's Day, Internet Nibblings. I'm your pangender auntie here to talk about books for January 2022. Time still working. The first book I read was Writing into the Dark from Dean Wesley Smith. Dean is a big proponent of pantsing, it's called, and he has a lot of very fixed ideas about what is good and right for writers to do. So pantsing versus plotting, or in George R.R. Martin's terminology, gardening versus architecting, is supposed to play more to my strengths that I've learned through Becca Syme's framework with the Clifton strengths. So I looked into Dean and also Holly Lyle to absorb some more content along that vein, because for the past 3 years, I've focused almost entirely on structure and plotting and all of these different rules and regulations for fiction and what you're supposed to do and what is the analysis of all the things that work and all the things that sell. And then all of the fiction that's been my absolute favorite has been pantsed. Martha Wells, for example. Writing into the Dark is Dean Wesley Smith's manifesto. He's written a lot of genre fiction. He's written in a bunch of different franchises, like Star Trek franchise, Star Wars, I believe. He's written a bunch of westerns and thrillers. Not my usual content personally. And then a lot of the other pantsers that I came across were writing content that also isn't generally in my wheelhouse. So I'm curious if there are folks out there who write literary fiction and who are of the pantsing persuasion. It would be cool to connect and have some community and support each other and grow and have a sense of normalcy about it. I then read Flash Fire and The Extraordinaries from TJ Klune, 2 separate books in the same series. Those were super cute. YA queer superhero fiction. Those were just super duper fun. I love the fan fiction, slash fiction really, that's used as a framework for the series. It's a great premise. He carries it off well. His characterization is juicy. It's so on point and rich. I love his stuff. He's such a character. I read Love Sense from Dr. Sue Johnson. I read Become a Famous Romance Author from Lisa Daly. I didn't gain too much from that either. I read Intuitive Eating from Evelyn Tribole, and that was hugely transformative for us. I've started doing that with the kids. There's a nice framework for it. I've had some pushback from their dad about it, and I've also struggled being an autistic parent and having some neurodivergent children. It has not been easy to cope with the changes in our schedule and our rituals and our framework, especially where food waste is concerned. I have a big problem with food waste just in general. That's just my stuff. And the general rules for food stuff that we've had in our house that have been fairly functional for us are being pushed to the limit with the intuitive eating protocol, but it's starting to find its rhythm and the kids are finding their way in it. The twins are 6 and Rumi's 4, so it might take a little longer than usual for them to find their way with it, but we'll see. I'm going to keep in on it and see what we discover about our needs and how we function. And then I read How to Write a Novel in Half a Month from Dean Wesley Smith. That's another collection of blog articles, and it felt very much like reading notes to myself that I would make. And maybe that's cool, and maybe that's what folks want, that sort of inside scoop, but I found it a little trying and not super helpful. If he was going to do an inside scoop like that, I would want to see the writing, and I would want to see the process. Like, who is it? Ron Carlson, who writes that How to Write a Short Story, and he shows you his process from stem to stern. And even in David M. Kaplan's revision, he takes you through pieces of his fiction. And almost every craft book, they take you through their fiction and show you how it moves and changes, or at least their students' fiction, like Joyce Carol Oates does. So I would have just liked a little more insight into the product of the work rather than like what he ate that day and what his wife was doing. And I read My Broken Vagina from Fran Bushe. Hilarious. Fran Bushe is a comedian, and that book details her story and her experiences with, what do they call it, like female dysfunction, bullshit medical terms. She's been through vaginismus and some other challenges, and it's so funny. So she's a sex educator. She does an educational stand-up routine about sexuality and relating and bodies. And it's just fantastic. She's so funny. She's so brilliant. I went through the audiobook and it's great because it's her voice. And I learned a lot from it. She also has little practical exercises sprinkled through that are all lovely and good nucleation points for your own discovery and growth. One of the things that she talks about is writing terrible erotica, not worrying about creating something someone else can consume, but writing erotica that is what you actually want, your ideal. And then you learn about yourself through it, and you learn about where your hangups are, get greater insight into how you function in intimate relating. I read Gulp from Mary Roach, which, okay, Mary was recommended to me from an autistic friend. And I get it. If you're into collecting trivia facts and stuff, she presents them in an easy to digest way. Gulp in particular, I didn't super enjoy because it's all digestion adjacent content, and that's not the most fun thing to read about throughout the course of a day. And there was also some concerning stuff in there for friends of mine that have some health issues right now, so I had to have very uncomfortable conversations with them about their bathroom practices and stuff, and it was not my favorite. I read Damaged Goods again from Talia Hibbert. I read The Inheritance Games from Jennifer Lynn Barnes. I wasn't crazy about that, but I can see how folks would enjoy it. It's a very simple puzzle kind of mystery, very, very chaste reverse harem vibes. So if you're into very simple puzzles, maybe YA, early high school, then you might enjoy it. I read The Heart Atlas from Brené Brown. That was good. It's like a summary of her work so far, almost a reference book. There's a lot of definitions and some narrative framework, but it didn't read with the same lightness and connection as her other books. So if you're going to that looking for a lovely Sunday read, I read My Year of Magical Thinking from Joan Didion. It's my first Joan Didion book. She's been recommended to me from a bunch of different sources, and I really enjoyed it. I felt instantly connected with her and her voice. The story is tracking every day after a spouse dies and the memory of the year before and what they were doing that day in the previous year. And then it ends when there's no more memory from the previous year of that person because they had passed away. And it was a really interesting exploration of the process of grief. It was a really poignant and real connection with those silly internal things that we think and those bits of magical thinking that we fall into that most people don't voice. It wouldn't be appropriate to say, I can't possibly get rid of my dead spouse's clothing because they'll need it when they get home. I can't possibly get rid of their shoes because their feet will be cold. There are these thoughts that were just normal thoughts throughout your entire lifetime together. And coming to terms with the fact that that's not your experience and not your reality anymore can take time and therapy and patience. I think it's beautiful, this authentic internal account of the process of that year of grief. I read Exes and Ho-Ho-Hos by Pippa Grant, and I don't want to drag anyone. It's a novella. I saw her on one of Becca Syme's discussions. She shares a top strength with me. I really wanted to read through some of the content from people that share my strengths as a writer. And so far, I guess I just feel alone. Like, oh, I don't write things like that, or I don't want to write things like that. Maybe that sounds shitty. It's definitely far more saleable and far more digestible, but specifically with that book, I had a tough time. It's a novella, so it's very short, but it goes from 0 to 60. There are these two different people, and the guy's wearing a Santa costume, and then she's feeling his boner through the velvet. And then they're in love, and it's magical and happily after ever with lots of sexual things. It wasn't my favorite. I read Mrs. and Mr. Bunny, Detectives Extraordinaire from Polly Horvath. That would probably be good for maybe late elementary. It was recommended to me from an autistic friend. It's their favorite book, and I had a hard time connecting with it, but it was really cute and would probably be good for that like liminal phase between childhood and becoming a bigger kid. I read Woke Racism from John McWhorter, and I think his is a really important voice. So that particular book is very spicy. I've read through a bunch of other books from him since then, and they're much less spicy, but they have the same humor and intelligence and incisive wit that he has. So he's saying things that I haven't heard a lot of other people saying, and he's shedding light on the potential effects of a lot of critical race theory and education around race that's going on right now. And I feel like his is a really important voice, and that book in particular is a really important piece of content to look at and see how you bounce off of it or where you resonate with it, and let it be a part of the influence. I read Putting It Together from James Lapine. That was really interesting. It's about his experiences working with Stephen Sondheim. So you get a behind-the-scenes peek at these brilliant minds in musical theater. I'm never super interested in getting tea and the gossip, the darker sides of people's nature, but seeing the process and hearing the stress and strain and then how things were resolved was very informative and interesting. And just learning more about the nitty-gritty that's not apparent from the final shows, having that insider look into the process was really cool. It's not a field that I have much exposure to or awareness of, so it was nice getting those inside peeks. So that's all. It was a pretty light month. I'm still in burnout. I'm also still, well, I guess this month is when it began in earnest, the Story Grid Guild that I'm having a really difficult time with. We are on week 7 right now, and the content is very poorly organized so far. It's a lot of reframing, and it's a lot of very interesting insights and very interesting connections and synthesis of different sorts of information and different theories. However, it hasn't fully coalesced yet. And I think they're trying to work out the kinks with the current guild cohort. I'm very well kinked by it. It's probably not neurodivergent friendly yet. If it ever will be, I hope it will. You might have heard last year the Heroic Journey 2.0, where Sean was reframing the hero's journey from Joseph Campbell and incorporating more systems theory into it, incorporating more Western model mathematics basis with the intention of moving away from outmoded forms of thought that are patriarchal, bigoted, or colonial. However, a lot of the heroic journey, that's just the process of one archetype. That's the internal alchemy of one archetype. There are a ton of other archetypes that move and work through human beings. And internal alchemy is a process. Like, that's a process that works through everything. It works in photosynthesis. It works in the gestation of a child. It works in therapy, processing trauma. It works in education, getting your degree and moving to a different level of bandwidth. So I don't know. It seems like Sean Coyne's primary goal is to add complexity with the interest of creating something that's better, that's more inclusive, that's more robust, that's more relevant, and can be a framework to generate masterworks of fiction. And that is antithetical to my process as a Taoist, which is to simplify and simplify again. So it may just be like water and oil that his goals right now are at odds with my process in the world. I plan to hold out until the end of this semester. I think the year's broken into 4 semesters, so I'm going to hold out through the rest of this semester, and then it'll iterate again for the next semester, I think, just with a different scene, because we're spending 3 months working through one scene and learning all the terminology of the new framework for the story grid and doing practices. We have cohorts that we do these different practices with every week, and it's been rough going. It's been a challenge. And even in reaching out to try to ask for support and guidance, it feels like you just get mocked and knocked down. Well, yeah, if you want greater context, you can buy our other programs for $1,000. Okay, yeah, you're supposed to be having a tough time. This is a whole new framework, and it's supposed to break your mind and help you come away from all of your preconceived notions that are wrong and help you expand to a new level of understanding by breaking your old egoic structures. And that might not be the most effective way to lead people into your new philosophy. And Sean consistently references a lot of different frameworks. Like, he'll reference biology, he'll reference systems theory, he'll reference these particular creators and their life's work. So at one point I asked for a reading list to where I could read these things and have a context for what he's referencing when he's answering a question and he's saying, you know, like in this other framework, here's how that works. But then he's having to explain that framework because nobody knows it. So I thought maybe if I read those books and understood their framework, then when he references it to explain his new way of thinking and going about fiction, that it would give me some context to where I could understand what he was talking about and connect things together more easily. And when I asked for the reading list, he's like, no, I am the one reading these things and doing the synthesis of them. Like, that's not your place. I'm not going to give you a reading list. Yeah, you can read those books if you want, but it's not going to help you because I am the one with the information and I am the one keeping this and I am the one who's developing this protocol. And he has two people that have worked closely with him, Danielle and Leslie, and they're lovely people and they seem to be working very hard to contribute to this new framework and explain it as best they can. But it feels like, so they release weekly videos of them explaining these different things, and they have this every week. They have these fake conversations in videos every week. There'll be 4 to 6 videos about all the different topics for that week's work, and they have a maid and butler dialogue about it where both of them are reading off a script or a sheet of notes or something, and they're discussing it, but they both know about it, so they're asking each other questions that the other person already knows the answer to, and they're like giving these rote answers. Yes, you explained that exactly as I anticipated when I read this question that I wrote for us to record for this video. And it's just not very compelling. I have a really difficult time paying attention to this fake conversation and this series of fake conversations every week. So I suggested that maybe they have videos of actual live conversations and instruction where they're going over the things to where the people receiving that instruction would be taught in that moment and would be asking the questions that people new to the content would be asking, so that all of us watching would get to go through the learning process with them, like Tim did with the original story grid in the podcast. We saw week after week after week this guy who had no idea how to write fiction and had no idea what any of this was talking about get held by the hand and walked gently, piece by piece by piece, as was relevant to something that he was writing. And he was mentored and taken bit by bit by bit. And, you know, there's like 200 episodes where he's just gentled through the process bit by bit by bit. And then they've totally moved away from that with the guild now, and even the work that we're doing. So last year in the guild, each week you could write your own scene that just fit a certain type of scene. And then we would discuss it and go through the different story grid pieces of it. And that was great because you got to write a lot of different types of scenes. You got to see a lot of different types of writers writing those types of scenes. And it was very informative, and there was like a closed feedback loop. But now we have these like private assignments that we fill in that nobody's looking at, and they're very specific. And they're so specific as to be almost completely irrelevant and so tortured. You know, it's like, here's the thing that we want you to learn. We're trying to teach you the alphabet. So I want you to just write this curve of a lowercase a over and over and over and over again. And just like carve that into leather, that curve of a lowercase a. And that's how we're going to build your understanding of letters and phonics and writing. And it just doesn't feel like it's building towards something that will be practical and useful for us. And there are a few people in the forums within threads of people being like, when is this going to start to click? Like, when is this going to start to feel not like treading water and choking on the ocean? A lot of people in that thread saying, I'm also just having a constant headache and I'm really struggling with this, but I see my writing improving. And for me personally, I haven't really been able to write. I've written a few scenes here and there, but overall, also since I'm overhauling my whole writing process for the Clifton Strengths insights that I've come to at the end of last year, I'm just fucking burnt out. I'm just so deep in autistic burnout at this point that it's like my brain is Teflon and I'm not processing what they're talking about. And I host one of the cohorts, so I'm holding space for other people who are struggling, and I'm trying to hold this framework and help explain to them what these different lessons they're trying to teach. So I have to like quickly digest it. Information is released on Sunday, and then we have our meeting Monday morning. So I have a day to digest as much as possible, process, synthesize, and then hold space for people who are also new to it. And half the time, like, they haven't looked at the material. So it's just, I'm having not the best time in there. And hopefully it continues to improve. But yeah, it's a rough going right now. I don't imagine I will be reading as much for the next few months. I think it stops in April. Also, at the beginning of April, I'll be attending a training with Kim John Payne in New York, and I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be on emotional co-regulation. So I'll report back about that as well. And I've also been thinking about making some videos reading different translations of the Tao Te Ching. I feel like I'd like to start with the Ursula K. Le Guin translation and talk about that. So let me know if that would be something that you'd be interested in. I don't know the legal parameters and plagiarism or whatever, what I'll need to do with that. Once I figure that out, I'll start posting those videos if there's an interest. I hope you have a beautiful February, and I'll talk to you at the end of the month.